The sun was barely rising over the Persian Gulf when the first signs of an unfolding crisis began to ripple across the world. Military satellites tracked unusual movements near Iranian ports. Naval radar screens lit up with American carrier groups repositioning toward the Middle East. In Moscow, the Kremlin convened an urgent Security Council meeting. Every channel, every office, every communication line was alive with one shared understanding. The world was on edge, and the margin for error had never been thinner. Russia's voice broke through the rising din of tension. The Kremlin's message was chilling in its simplicity. Restraint. Don't act rashly, it said. Avoid the mistakes of history. Peace must remain the focus. The warning was not casual. It reflected decades of experience, and it came at a time when Washington's military posture in the Gulf had never been more visible. American strike groups, including the USS Abraham Lincoln and accompanying destroyers, were already moving toward the Strait of Hormuz. Analysts in the Pentagon described the deployment as precautionary, designed to provide options. Yet the optics were unmistakable. The United States was preparing for a worst-case scenario. Iranian intelligence, in turn, monitored every move with equal intensity, interpreting every vessel, every statement, every signal as both threat and provocation. In Tehran, the message was similarly clear. Iran did not seek war, but it would not hesitate to defend itself. Military leaders spoke openly of capabilities that could strike U.S. positions across the region. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard warned that any aggression would be met with decisive, targeted retaliation, extending far beyond their borders. The calculus was precise. Deter first, respond with overwhelming force if provoked. Behind closed doors, diplomatic channels attempted to operate in parallel with the drumbeat of military maneuvers. Reports suggested back-channel communications between U.S. and Iranian officials, informal and unconfirmed, yet hinting at a mutual, if cautious, desire to prevent full-scale conflict. The problem, analysts noted, was timing and trust. While envoys might exchange words, ships were sailing into potentially contested waters. Missiles were on high alert, and rhetoric in public statements escalated by the hour. In Moscow, officials understood the stakes. Russia had long-standing relationships in the Middle East and held interests in Iran, Syria, and beyond. Any conflict between the U.S. and Iran would ripple through energy markets, destabilize fragile alliances, and threaten Russian investments and strategic influence. The Kremlin's warning was therefore twofold. It sought to preserve stability while signaling that Russia was watching and ready to respond diplomatically and politically if lines were crossed. As the U.S. carrier strike group moved, Washington issued statements emphasizing restraint and readiness. President Trump, addressing the nation and the world, framed the movement as precautionary. "We have a big force heading in the direction of Iran," he said. "We would prefer diplomacy, but we are prepared for any scenario." Behind the public words, military analysts knew that carrier groups and guided missile destroyers positioned in the Gulf were an unmistakable signal. America was both warning and posturing simultaneously. The timing of these deployments coincided with intense Iranian military readiness. Missile batteries were activated, drones were deployed on exercises, and command centers simulated strike scenarios. Iran's first vice president stated publicly that their forces were prepared for all contingencies, while emphasizing that war was not the desired outcome. Propaganda videos, some using AI-generated imagery, were circulated to project strength, claiming the ability to defeat American defenses, though independent verification was lacking. The message, however, was clear. Tehran wanted to ensure the world understood the potential cost of miscalculation. In the Persian Gulf, U.S. naval forces adjusted their formations in anticipation of threats. Radar systems scanned the horizon, sonar operators monitored underwater activity, and fighter jets maintained patrols above. Every sailor knew that the difference between caution and catastrophe could be measured in minutes. Across the Gulf, Iranian forces mirrored the vigilance. Surface ships, submarines, and air defense systems were in constant communication. The tension was palpable, almost tangible, across both fleets. The stakes were not limited to military posturing. Economists and trade analysts warned that any disruption in the Strait of Hormuz would send shockwaves through global energy markets. Iran has repeatedly signaled that it could close the narrow shipping corridor, a move that would instantly affect oil prices worldwide. Financial markets, already jittery, watched closely as tankers rerouted or delayed departures. Insurers recalculated premiums, and governments across Europe and Asia weighed their exposure. Meanwhile, regional actors tried to navigate a delicate balance. Israel intensified coordination with U.S. intelligence, preparing defensive and retaliatory options in case conflict erupted. Gulf states, including the UAE and Jordan, expressed mixed positions, some offering logistical support, others insisting that their territories would not be used for attacks on Iran. Each decision carried political, economic, and military weight, forcing countries to weigh loyalty, risk, and strategic interests simultaneously. Moscow's warning contrasted sharply with the unfolding military reality. Russia did not command forces in the Gulf, but its diplomatic and political leverage remained significant. Officials in the Kremlin stressed that unilateral action by the U.S. could destabilize the entire region, triggering not only a direct conflict with Iran, but also broader economic and security consequences. Russian analysts highlighted Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq as potential flashpoints where miscalculation could escalate quickly. The world watched, riveted, as each side escalated in both words and posture. In Tehran, military leaders outlined potential responses to an American attack, emphasizing asymmetric strategies designed to impose maximum cost while minimizing their own exposure. Iranian officials framed every step as defensive, shield against perceived aggression, but the level of planning reflected a sophisticated and lethal understanding of regional dynamics. Washington, in turn, reinforced its narrative of deterrence. Military spokespersons stressed readiness while affirming that diplomacy remained the goal. Analysts noted the delicate dance. American forces had to be visibly prepared to act while avoiding steps that could be interpreted as provocation. Every movement of ships, every press statement, every strategic exercise was calculated to send signals, a language of deterrence and warning. Across this high-stakes chessboard, miscommunication remained a constant risk. Satellites might misinterpret movements, radar anomalies could trigger false alerts, and commanders on both sides faced split-second decisions that could escalate into full conflict. Observers noted that the combination of military buildup, rhetoric, and historical distrust created an environment where even a minor incident could trigger a major confrontation. Iranian media amplified this sense of readiness, releasing imagery of missile tests, command drills, and naval exercises. While some content appeared designed primarily for domestic consumption, the messaging was also deliberate. The international community, particularly the U.S., was being warned. Propaganda videos depicted scenarios where American interceptors might fail against advanced missile maneuvers, reinforcing the notion that Tehran's defensive capabilities were credible and capable of significant disruption. Regional allies, sensing the stakes, moved cautiously. Israel strengthened missile defense systems. Intelligence sharing increased between Washington and regional partners, and Gulf states conducted internal risk assessments. Every nation with a stake in Middle Eastern stability understood that the potential costs of conflict could be catastrophic, yet the pressure to signal resolve was equally potent. Diplomacy, however, remained a fragile thread. Informal back-channel exchanges hinted at the possibility of de-escalation, but nothing was guaranteed. Each statement, each posture, each maneuver carried weight, and trust was in short supply. Analysts pointed out that even if diplomatic channels were open, the sheer momentum of military buildup could outpace negotiation, making timing critical. The Kremlin's warning, then, was not merely advisory. It was a reminder of what was at stake beyond Tehran or Washington. Russia's message emphasized consequences, extending to global energy security, international markets, and regional stability. It served as both caution and political positioning. Moscow wanted to assert influence while signaling that unilateral U.S. action could have unintended consequences. As tensions grew, American public discourse mirrored the strategic uncertainty. Analysts, commentators, and media outlets debated the likelihood of conflict, the intentions behind deployments, and the potential consequences for global security. Iran's messaging reinforced the stakes. Miscalculation would have a price, and Tehran was prepared to exact it. By midday, the situation in the Gulf had reached an unprecedented level of alert. Carrier strike groups adjusted patrol routes. Iranian vessels conducted synchronized maneuvers, and missile batteries remained on high alert. Communications lines buzzed with updates, but each side operated under suspicion, interpreting every action through the lens of defense or deterrence. Moscow monitored every development. The Kremlin's call for restraint remained consistent. Avoid escalation, pursue diplomacy, and recognize the dangers inherent in miscalculation. Russian officials were acutely aware that conflict could ignite not only in Iran, but in surrounding theaters, destabilizing Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and potentially drawing in forces from multiple powers. The world stood at a precarious threshold. Iran, with its stated defensive posture and credible missile capabilities. The United States, with overwhelming naval power and regional allies. And Russia, with influence and warnings, all navigated a volatile mix of power, perception, and risk. Each public statement, military deployment, and back-channel communication was part of a high-stakes negotiation, whether official or not. Observers noted that history weighed heavily on all sides. Previous U.S. interventions in the Middle East, sanctions regimes, and regional conflicts informed current calculations. Iranian leaders cited past aggressions to justify readiness. American officials cited strategic imperatives and deterrence. Russian analysts drew lessons from historical U.S. interventions to frame the Kremlin's warning. Every move, every word, every calculation contributed to a tense equilibrium. The Strait of Hormuz remained a focal point, not merely as a shipping corridor, but as a symbol of leverage and potential disruption. Global markets watched, aware that conflict in this narrow waterway could ripple through energy prices, supply chains, and financial stability. At the operational level, commanders in both Tehran and Washington prepared contingencies. Strike plans were updated, missile readiness checked, and intelligence assets placed on heightened alert. Simulations ran continuously, modeling potential outcomes and emphasizing the thin line between deterrence and engagement. Despite the military tension, diplomats continued to search for openings. Informal channels, though limited in scope, offered a glimmer of hope. Analysts emphasized that even partial communication could prevent a misstep from spiraling into conflict. Yet every movement of troops and every public statement created pressure, reducing the room for maneuver. The world watched, uncertain and anxious. News outlets broadcast updates on deployments, warnings, and statements. Social media amplified every report, mixing fact, speculation, and analysis. Public perception itself became part of the crisis, the pressure to act decisively or appear strong influenced decisions on all sides. In this environment, the margin for error was razor thin. Military assets converged, rhetoric intensified, and trust was scarce. Analysts warned that any misjudgment, any unplanned engagement, could trigger rapid escalation. The Kremlin's warning served as a sober reminder. The consequences of conflict would extend far beyond Iran or the U.S., affecting global stability, energy markets, and international order. As night fell across the Middle East, the tension remained. Ships patrolled, radar stations hummed, missiles were on standby, and leaders weighed their options. The situation was volatile, complex, and inherently unpredictable. Each side claimed a desire to avoid war, yet each prepared as though it were inevitable. The crisis was a study in modern geopolitics. Deterrence, perception, capability, and communication all intersecting in a delicate, dangerous balance. One misstep, one misunderstood signal, could ignite a conflict that few intended and fewer could control. The Russian warning hung over the proceedings like a shadow. Restraint was necessary. Diplomacy remained possible. Miscalculation could lead to catastrophe. Yet the world waited, tense and uncertain. As military assets converged, rhetoric escalated, and the Middle East teetered on the edge. In this precarious moment, the stakes could not be clearer. Global stability, regional security, and the lives of millions hung in the balance. Iran asserted readiness and resolve. The United States displayed overwhelming power. Russia called for caution. And the world watched, knowing that in the space between words, movements, and calculations, the difference between peace and war was measured in minutes, and perhaps seconds.